Until very recently, the American position on the war between Israel and Iran appeared to be incredibly delicate. On its face, it almost seemed a bit like, imagine Donald Trump, except he's walking this fine line, a very fine line, trying to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. But as he was walking that high wire, Israel and Iran were exchanging missile fire. Israel is trying to destroy Iran's nuclear capability by force.
Israel's surprise strikes on nuclear sites and military leadership inside Iran. Smoke rising above Natanz, an Iranian nuclear facility.
Iran is trying to punish Israel for even trying.
Missiles streaked over Tel Aviv Friday, with some Iranian projectiles breaching Israel's air defenses.
And then there was Trump, insisting the US is not involved, trying to stay above the fray without getting embroiled in a war that is constantly threatening to pull the US in.
The president told me, we're not involved in it. It's possible that we could get involved, but we're not involved at this moment.
That was just a few days ago. Certainly not the case today.
There's a big difference between now and a week ago, right?
And you know what? This notion of the US as a bystander, it wasn't even true then. It's the wrong way to look at it. The US is involved much more directly than Trump lets on. I'll show you how and where that involvement might still go. From the very start, the US has actively downplayed its role. The earliest messaging from the White House, Israel's initial attack was unilateral action, and we are not involved. But we know they knew the attack was coming, partly because Israel's prime minister said so after the attack on Fox News.
Look, I've been in constant contact with President Trump, and obviously we informed our American friends and President Trump, our great friend, ahead of time.
But also, 2 days before the attack, the US was pulling its non-essential personnel out of the area, flying them back home, and trying to reveal as little as possible while they were at it.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens.
Now, being vague is one thing, but just hours now before the attack, listen to what Trump told reporters about how if Israel were to attack Iran, that would be bad for ongoing nuclear talks.
I don't want them going in because I think that would blow it. Might help it, actually, but it also could blow it.
So again, just to be clear, that's Trump before the attack happens, saying he hopes an attack won't happen, knowing full well that it's about to. Or else Netanyahu is lying about keeping Trump fully informed, which I don't think is the case. What might explain this is reporting in Axios, citing two unnamed Israeli officials, that Trump was only pretending to oppose an Israeli attack in public, and that Israel had a clear US green light. The goal, again, according to Axios reporting, to convince Iran that no attack was imminent and make sure Iranians on Israel's target list wouldn't move to new locations.
Yeah, it's totally plausible. It could be a deception that was concocted by Washington and Jerusalem together. They're allies. They have a common enemy here. So why would we assume that they didn't talk? I'm not surprised at all that the US knew a lot more about this Israeli attack and probably was much more involved than he's publicly willing to admit to.
And let me play for you an excerpt of an interview Netanyahu gave to Brett Baier of Fox News, where Benjamin Netanyahu was questioned on this very point.
I mean, there were reports that President Trump kind of helped you achieve your strategic surprise by publicly urging you not to attack when he already knew you had decided to do it. So you were closely coordinating with the U.S. throughout this process.
Look, we're fully coordinated, but understand that America, under President Trump, will make the decisions that are best for America.
Note, he doesn't really answer the question at all, except to admit that the two countries were indeed fully coordinated. And I'll admit, I have no way of knowing exactly what the US president knew and when. But this also isn't where the reporting stops. US officials have also apparently told several media outlets that Trump rejected, vetoed an Israeli plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader. Israel denies this. But again, if true, it suggests at least some level of coordination, joint decision-making, a willingness on Trump's part to shape what Israel does. And all of this is just the beginning. You don't have to look behind closed doors to see how the U.S. is already directly involved in the Israel-Iran conflict.
Netanyahu did confirm the U.S. military is helping Israel defend its airspace.
An American official tells CNN that the United States is playing an active role in helping Israel intercept Iranian missiles.
According to 3 U.S. officials, that the U.S. has been helping in shooting down these Iranian missiles.
U.S. planes and at least one destroyer were already reportedly in the eastern Mediterranean, just off Israel's coast, when Iran's counterattack arrived. And now, more naval warships are understood to be on the way. I've gone through media reports citing American officials and then tried to corroborate those reports with ship tracking data. What it all adds up to is the U.S. actively moving its chess pieces around the board. And I'll stress, what I'm about to show you, these are approximate locations because it is really hard to know exactly where military assets are at any given moment. But American officials say the USS Thomas Hudner, that's a destroyer class capable of shooting down ballistic missiles, that it has redeployed from the Western Mediterranean to be closer to the action. Politico is reporting that the USS Nimitz is also rerouting. That's an aircraft carrier seen recently by ship spotters sailing west through the Singapore Strait. They could arrive in the Arabian Sea in a matter of days, joining the USS Carl Vinson carrier strike group. All of these assets together adding significantly to Israel's ability to defend itself.
On the defensive side, the U.S. is probably close to the max of what's actually able to be provided. Whether it's systems like THAAD, which is an interceptor system, whether it's other ballistic missile interceptor capabilities, a lot of that is going to come from the ships and from what some of the movement that we're seeing from naval assets now.
You can remind the Iranians that there's a lot more military kind of hurt, if you will, that can come their way from the United States if this conflict continues and if somehow U.S. gets dragged into it.
So here's the million-dollar question. The assets the U.S. has or is moving to the region, they're capable of doing much more than simply posturing or even defending Israel from incoming missiles. So what red line or objective might compel the U.S. to take a much more aggressive position? The line Donald Trump has drawn in the sand, he posted over the weekend on Truth Social. If we are attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before. And then all that followed by a quick PS that everyone just wants peace, right? Right?
He's repeatedly said, let them fight it out. Israel and Iran engage in a tit for tat, let them get it out of their system. He has also made it clear that the only time the United States will get involved is if U.S. personnel bases and so on are targeted by Iran.
That doesn't take much. An errant missile either from Iran or a rocket from an Iraqi Shia militant group, which have thus far been quite restrained, are likely to trigger at least some consideration by the Trump administration.
And though Iran knows attacking U.S. assets is perhaps the riskiest thing it could do right now because it could force Trump's hand, it has also very publicly maintained that it holds the U.S. responsible for what has happened thus far. Iranian state media posted this almost immediately after Israel's attack, citing the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that the attack could not have been carried out without coordination with and approval of the United States. And as the main supporter of this regime, referring to Israel as the regime, that the U.S. would be held responsible for the dangerous consequences of Israel's adventurism. But Iran has other cards to play too. It controls the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical bottleneck for the flow of oil. Millions of barrels of oil a day travel from oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, out to global markets.
Iran has many ways in which it could escalate. One obvious option is closing the Straits of Hormuz, which would in effect cut off oil shipments to much of the world, since much of the oil travels through that strait. And that is something that Donald Trump does not want to see, because it would push the price of oil up and the price of gas up at the pump.
It is these threats, along with the prospect of Iran developing a nuclear bomb, that has led some U.S. lawmakers to argue now is the time for the U.S. to end the Iranian threat one way or another.
If diplomacy is not successful and we left with the option of force, I would urge President Trump to go all in to make sure that when this operation is over, there's nothing left standing in Iran regarding their nuclear program.
And I can show you one way all in might begin. One of Israel's earliest strike targets inside Iran was the Natanz nuclear facility. It's important because that's primarily where Iran enriches uranium, which is how you make a nuclear bomb, and Israel claims to have done serious damage to this facility. A base like Fordo, however, that's another uranium enrichment site. It's literally built into a mountain, impenetrable, virtually invincible to any known munition Israel can drop from the sky.
Fordo has about 300 feet of concrete above it. It is so far buried, and the concrete is not even normal concrete. It's reinforced, special reinforced concrete, that it requires these massive, massive bombs.
And you know who has massive, massive bombs? That's right, the U.S. In its arsenal, so-called bunker busters. These great big 30,000-pound bombs that are so big and heavy that they can only be carried by specialized large bombers like the B-2. So for the more hawkish members of Trump's administration,
if that means providing bombs, provide bombs. If that means flying,
busting bombs,
whatever bombs. If it means flying with Israel, fly with Israel.
Israel would have preferred that the entirety of this war be a joint operation, and that all of the targets, both nuclear and otherwise, be jointly attacked by the U.S. But on Fordo, it's the one site that is really so hardened. It really would be a challenge for Israel to do it on its own, at least in a bombing campaign.
Now, I won't try to predict Trump's next move.
President Trump issues a stark warning to Iran's supreme leader, posting on social media that we know where the Ayatollah is hiding, but that we're not going to take him out, at least not for now.
We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran.
He posted most recently unconditional surrender.
But Israel's attack on Iran has presented both an opportunity and a problem. On the one hand, it's thought that this applies real pressure on Iran, and maybe that in a weakened state, it might be more likely to fold in any talks about its nuclear program. But on the other hand, if Iran feels it has no other option but to escalate, if it feels nuclear deterrence by arming itself with a bomb is the only way to survive, then this ongoing war may only be about to get even more complicated.